All right, hello there, my fuzzy wuzzy YouTube friends. Today we're going to be making specifically this sound, but overall we're going to look at the Reese bass, the Reese bass that Noisia makes. Some really interesting sound design here. So what I want to look at today is specifically this sound, as I said, the Noisia Reese bass, and how it's constructed mostly. And I will be doing this in FL Studio with only native FL Studio plugins. So if this patcher is intimidating, because I've seen in the comments some people are like, oh my goodness, immediately irrelevant because it's FL Studio and it's it's the patcher. But the only thing you should know about this is this represents signal path. It's basically all it is. I have a Serum FX plugin then in there, but I think it's just some compression, not just distortion. So, but you can do that with Wave Shaper as well. I don't know why I used Serum there. But yeah, most of these, except for that one, all of these are native FL Studio plugins. And if not, you can actually you have something similar in Ableton or in Cubase or in whatever you use. Something similar will be available in those plugins. First off, we have Sytrus. And Sytrus is an FM patch, an FM plugin. And I literally have one oscillator basically just oscillating the other one, or FMing the other one. So let me isolate this for us real quick. Let's move all this stuff up so we can just see what we're doing. I'll break this path and just hook it up here. This one is just a sub, I'm guessing. So let's just throw this one in here and let's see what we get. And already you can hear that's kind of a very Noisia-ish. So if I get rid of this one FM here, you can hear that operator 1 is just the saw wave. And then I have operator 2 FMing him, so it was basically just a sine wave that I edited a little bit, just to give it a little bit extra high end. If you just I don't know if it just adds a lot of high end, but just add a little bit of crunch with the fact that it's almost a triangle wave. And what you do is, to get that oscillating sound, is you offset these oscillators slightly. And that's basically what gives you this that movement sound, because if you play lower notes, higher notes it's quicker, lower notes it's that's higher notes. You can hear it slower. That gives you the basic sound, and that just roots straight out. I think I may have some unison on here. Yeah, I just put a little bit of unison on it. So if you don't listen to that at all, you just, all I did is I added an extra signal in there. Not 3, just 2. And I messed with a few of these parameters. If you have Sytrus, you can, I think I just turned down the phasing a little bit, the unison phase, so it's not too... Yeah, I'm not sure what I did here, but just make sure you don't have too much unison, but if you want some stereo, you can add some unison in there. That's basically all you need. And that's the FM patch. Next thing I have that I root into here is I do a little bit of distortion. And what that sounds like is this. I have a little bit of distortion and flanger. So if you have a flanger plugin, I might as well have used FL Studio's native flanger plugin. But what I like about Serum's effects plugin is you have all of these effects all in one little package. So if you have Serum, remember that you also have an FX plugin that you can use on other plugins, which is quite amazing. So first thing is the distortion. Just a little bit of tube distortion, which I turned up there. And then I added the flanger. Just a little bit of flanging. See, the way I approached these basses in the beginning was I didn't opt for any of the phasing or the flanging stuff. All I did was distort it, and then put a little bit of EQing and compression on it, and it didn't sound quite right. But once you add in the phaser, everything works out quite well. Okay, so this is an interesting bit because in this region right here, what I'm doing, and this is a big part of what creates this sort of sound, that sort of movementy sound of the Noisia bass, is I used to use a bandpass for this, but it sounded wrong. You keep losing all of the bass once the notch goes up. So let me just show you. So yeah, be sure to not make it a bandpass. That's what in multiple tutorials I saw this. But once it goes up there, you lose all of the bass. So I just made it a notch. And you retain most of the frequency spectrum, but it just accentuates certain parts. Yeah, so if you have a parametric EQ or an EQ that has multiple parameters which are automatable, then you can give that a go. That's basically all I did there. And then the next thing is quite a key part is the phaser. The key part I mess with here is the depth, to what depth the phasing happens. If you put it to a too wide a range of phasing, it sounds a little muddy. It doesn't have all of that bass or all that power it should have. And another important bit is the sweeping frequency. I try to match it up with the sweeping frequency of what happens in Sytrus, but that's pretty much it. And also the number of stages, and that basically correlates with the amount of cuts that the phasing causes on the frequency spectrum. So it's basically like a comb filter. It creates a bunch of cuts in the frequency spectrum, and this is the amount of cuts it causes. So if you look up here, the amount of cuts it causes, and you can't see it that clearly, but it causes a bunch of cuts within the frequency spectrum that it sweeps across, and that's the amount of cuts. You don't want to put too many cuts up there, otherwise it sounds sort of reverby, because I often use comb filters to create reverb, which isn't really necessary. And you can also mess with the dry and wet and make sure you have a good range there. And the feedback is basically just flanging, and make sure that's not too high because you already have a flanger up there. So that's basically here what I used here. And also pay attention to the stereo. I usually turn the stereo all the way off because for bass, having too much stereo causes too much phasing between the left and the right, and that could cause some problems once you're playing it on speakers. You can get some phasing there, which is not necessary. Next we have a bit more distortion. wave shaper is quite nice. This is I think this is the way they distort some like distortion pedals. Use this type of distortion wave shape for guitars. So usually how my workflow goes is I usually start off with a Sytrus and then I put the Maximus on the end, and this is just to keep your ears from exploding, basically. It just compresses everything and keeps it from clipping, because in the process of making something like this you will inevitably have some clipping, because there's a lot of distortion in here and most of it's just overdrive stuff. So yeah, keep that in mind. Usually just start with the FM and just put the compressor in the last part of the what do you call it, signal, so you just don't get too much ear damage. And then the last part is basically this this little compression. You basically scoop out some of these mids, otherwise it sounds a little muddy, so you just put this in there. And then you have your little Noisia plugin. Let's just take a good look at what I did here. Basically, I think it's basically just an empty Maximus used to control everything and make it not crush too much, as to keep it from distorting too much, although there is a lot of distortion. But basically it's just there to cap everything off so it doesn't clip entirely when it goes out to the main signal. And the last part, the last part I do here is I put in, this is basically just a sine wave to add in a little bit of, just to put in a sub. So if I get rid of this section here, you can hear it. And that's basically that. Let me just see how long this tutorial has been. It's about 12 minutes. And a good approach to have is you will never ever make anything sound exactly the way someone else does, except if you have the actual patch. So this is just the workflow you should have. So basically, if you have something FMing something else, distorting it, and then you have two EQs on it, one to control it a little bit and one to add in some movement, and then you compress it, you basically have the Noisia sound, but it'll sound a little bit different every time. So what I then do is I usually save this patch. It's basically saved as Noisia 1 right now. Change the parameters around a bit, and what I do then is I create a little bit of a library for myself to work with. And as you know, with Noisia stuff, is they don't really care about the key they play their stuff in. If you do some analyzing, you'll see that they don't really care about the key they play their songs in. So what I do is I'd make this sort of bass for one bar and sample it out. And I do this a bunch of times while changing the parameters around a little bit, and every time you get a little bit of a different sound until you get something that I sampled out already. And then once you do some chopping and changing, you can get something that sounds like this situation here, where I took a bunch of these samples I made, and here I only have like, what is it, 10 or something. And then you chop and change it a little bit and get a little bit of a motif going. And then you have something that sounds like this. And adding in some, what I do is I route all of those sounds to their own buses in case I need to change anything. So that's basically these ones right here. And what I do then is I route all of them to a main sidechain bus. And what I like to do is I like to have full control over my sidechain, because I used to use the limiter, but it doesn't give you much control over what the sidechain envelope looks like. So what I do is I create my own sidechain envelope with some sort of automation. So I basically just automate the main phaser here, or the fader. You can see that. So if I play the sounds, you can hear it creates the sidechaining. And here I have just a drum loop. I'll do another tutorial on how to create drums for drum and bass. But yeah, once you add in the drum loop, which sounds like this. I didn't really know how to do sidechaining on something like drum and bass, so what I did is I just took in the main hits, which is basically the kick and the snare, and put sidechain on the kick and the snare, and that sounded pretty good to me, so I just kept it that way. A lot of this is experimenting, so keep that in mind. So yeah, that's how you do that. That's how that workflow works, but I'll do another tutorial going on in depth on how sampling basses is probably the best way to go about doing stuff like dubstep or drum and bass. It's very important. So yeah, that's basically the best I got on drum and bass at the moment. The bass design is probably the most important bit, and that's probably how Noisia does a lot of their work. Is they go about. I think Thijs, one of the guys in the band, goes about just making a bunch of sounds, and the other guys go around composing with those sounds. So that's a really good workflow to go about, and it saves you a lot of time because you break up all the pieces of the work into increments. So yeah, I hope that helps you guys. I sure wish I had this kind of advice a year or two ago, and I hope it helps. So leave a like if you enjoyed this video, please. It helps me out a lot, and consider subscribing because I'll be doing a lot more tutorials on drum and bass and dubstep as well, because dubstep sound design is really interesting. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.